Imagine for a second that you're plugging your brain into a massive blinking supercomputer.
Okay.
You close your eyes as a human, and when you open them, you are looking at the world through the optical sensors of a robotic beaver.
A robotic beaver.
Yeah. And not just any robotic beaver, but one tasked with infiltrating a threatened woodland ecosystem.
Which is quite the departure from a cowboy doll getting lost in a pizza restaurant, isn't it?
That is the understatement of the year. Because when you hear Pixar, your brain instantly prepares for a very specific type of experience, you know?
Yeah, you brace yourself for that, like, immaculate emotional precision.
Exactly. You know you're going to laugh, and you know they're going to find a way to make you weep over something entirely inanimate, like a desk lamp or a trash compactor, or literally just the concept of sadness.
Right.
But diving into today's sources feels like opening a completely unhinged mystery box. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are doing a comprehensive breakdown of Pixar's 2026 release, Hoppers, directed by Daniel Chong.
And we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We've been poring over critical analyses from Rotten Tomatoes, Roger Ebert, Variety, alongside this massive wave of raw audience reactions.
And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out if this film represents the creative rebound that Pixar has been, so desperately searching for.
Right, because you go into the theater expecting those classic Pixar tears, and instead you're hit with experimental sci-fi, teenage angst, and an animatronic beaver tail.
It's wild. And what makes this deep dive so fascinating to me isn't just the mechanics of the movie itself, but what the polarized reactions are actually telling us about the current state of animation.
Oh, absolutely.
We're watching a legacy studio. I mean, literally the gold standard of the medium, trying to figure out how it survives in a modern landscape. A landscape that seems to value fast-paced, chaotic entertainment just as much as traditional storytelling.
Yeah, it's a completely different era. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's get right into the mechanics of that bizarre premise. Because before we can even begin to judge if Pixar is officially back, we need to understand exactly what this movie is attempting to do.
Right, so the plot follows Mabel Tanaka. She's this brilliant, tech-savvy teenager who gets her hands on experimental hopper technology.
And this isn't just virtual reality, right?
No, not at all. She doesn't just put on a headset. The hopper tech literally transfers her entire consciousness out of her human body and into a robotic animal.
Which is just a wild concept.
It really is. And she does this specifically to save a threatened ecosystem from collapse. It's a massive, audacious swing for a studio that usually trades in very grounded emotional metaphors.
I mean, on paper, it sounds like a teenager's late-night, caffeine-fueled fever dream mixed with a National Geographic documentary.
That's a pretty accurate description, honestly.
Yeah. So I have to ask, does grounding a totally off-the-wall sci-fi concept like a robot beaver in human emotion actually work here? Or is this just a studio being weird for the sake of being weird to grab headlines?
What's fascinating here is that it works entirely because they commit to the emotional anchor. Pixar thrives precisely when it takes high-concept absurdity and bolts it down with deep emotional coherence.
Like with Up.
Exactly. Think back to Up. An old man ties thousands of helium balloons to his house and flies to South America.
Right.
If you try to explain that to someone who has never seen it, it sounds utterly ridiculous. But it works flawlessly because the absurdity is anchored by the crushing weight of grief and the search for connection.
So Hoppers manages to pull off a similar trick.
According to the critical consensus, yes, the wild premise actually holds water. I mean, the Rotten Tomatoes scores for this film are sitting comfortably in the mid to high 90s.
Which is an enormous deal. The sources we reviewed pointed out that this is Pixar's best critical score in nearly a decade.
Precisely. The critical sphere is really hailing it as a major return to form. You have outlets like Variety, affectionately calling it an out-of-the-box critter comedy, and they really praised its sheer invention.
Yeah, and Creative Block went even further, right?
They did. They explicitly labeled it Pixar's best original film since Coco. They noted it as a massive, much-needed bounce back after some of the studio's weaker recent entries.
Like Lightyear and Elio.
Exactly.
The contrast with Lightyear is actually a perfect lens for this, I think. Lightyear was a sci-fi movie that took itself so incredibly seriously, it felt almost weighed down by its own mythology.
Oh, absolutely. It was very dense.
But Hoppers, on the other hand, just throws its arms open and embraces the absolute bonkers nature of its own plot.
It leans into the weirdness.
It totally does. And reviewers at RogerEbert.com specifically highlighted the film's warmth, its charm, and its deep sense of community. So the professional critics are definitely seeing that classic Pixar heart beating underneath the metal exterior of the robotic beaver.
They are. They're looking at the ambition and the energy. The consensus is that the film feels fresh. It feels alive.
Yeah.
It hits those communal warm notes that we associate with the studio's golden era, even if it uses a very strange vehicle to get there. But, and this is a massive but, when we shift our focus away from the professional critics and look at the general audience and niche genre reviewers, the narrative starts to fracture.
It becomes a serious tug of war.
A huge tug of war.
Yes, the audience divide. This is where the mystery box gets messy, and honestly, where I start to get a little confused. If you look at the raw audience sentiment on platforms like Reddit, it is overwhelmingly positive.
Right.
But it's positive almost entirely in terms of sheer chaotic entertainment. You have users literally calling it one of the most fun movies of 2026.
Notice how the operative word there is fun, not perfect or profound.
Right. Fun. But then you look at the more analytical breakdowns from niche reviewers, and they are pointing out massive structural flaws.
Yeah, the flaws are definitely there.
Like, Plugged In, for instance, points out that the humor in Hoppers leans heavily toward the chaotic and juvenile side. We aren't getting the sharply witty, multi-layered dialogue that adults and kids can enjoy simultaneously. We're getting slapstick.
And they also call the film's core environmental message well-intentioned but somewhat muddled.
Right. And they're absolutely not the only ones noticing these foundational cracks.
No, Games Radar Plus pointed out that the character motivations throughout the second act feel noticeably underdeveloped.
Like characters are just doing things because the script says so.
Exactly. They do things because the plot needs them to, not because it makes psychological sense. And furthermore, The Guardian noted that the primary antagonist lacks any real depth or menace.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because I am looking at these two columns of data, and I am really struggling to reconcile them. If a movie has a weak villain, it usually completely ruins the stakes for me.
Sure, that makes sense.
If your villain isn't a credible threat, the hero's journey feels totally pointless. Plus, the sources mention that the film suffers from severe tonal whiplash.
It swings pretty wildly, yeah.
Right, 1 minute it's exploring the profound tragedy of a collapsing ecosystem, and the next minute Mabel is making a loud, juvenile joke about her beaver teeth. So why are the scores so high? It feels like audiences are giving this movie a massive free pass just because it's colorful and highly energetic. Are we just being blinded by fast-paced chaos?
I completely understand the frustration, and that is a very valid pushback. But this raises an important question about modern viewing habits. What are audiences actually prioritizing right now when they sit down in a theater?
I mean, apparently not narrative consistency.
Well, the data we are seeing suggests a major shift. Currently, a large segment of the audience prioritizes fast-paced, highly entertaining escapism over perfect thematic clarity or flawless narrative structure.
So if the pacing is just fast enough and the jokes land frequently enough, we just collectively agree to forgive a villain that has no actual menace.
To a significant degree, yes. It's about friction. Think about the tonal inconsistency you mentioned, the tragedy of the ecosystem versus the slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
It's like trying to listen to a profound, beautiful cello solo, but someone is loudly beatboxing right next to you.
That sounds incredibly annoying.
Right. Both might be impressive in their own right, but they're fighting for the same sonic space, which creates friction. Historically, critics and audiences would penalize a movie heavily for that friction.
But not here.
Exactly. With Hoppers, it seems they're willing to overlook the beatboxing because the overall energy of the room is just so high. The film prioritizes entertainment over delivering a perfectly precise, uninterrupted message.
Okay, that makes sense.
The 90s on Rotten Tomatoes aren't saying this is a structurally flawless film. They are saying this film successfully achieves its primary goal, which is to be a ridiculously fun, emotionally sincere, chaotic ride.
I see. It's an entirely different rubric for success than the one we used for, say, Finding Nemo, where every single story beat was meticulously calibrated.
Exactly. It's a different era of Pixar.
Still, even with my reservations about the weak villain and the tonal whiplash, I really don't want to undersell the film. Because when you look past the chaotic pacing, the actual ambition behind the themes in Hoppers is staggering.
It really is.
That ambition is what elevates it from being just a goofy 90-minute distraction into something worthy of a real deep dive.
I completely agree. The ambition is the film's saving grace. Let's look closely at those themes, starting with the ecology aspect.
Let's do it.
Now, Pixar is no stranger to environmental messaging. We all remember the brilliant, wordless opening of Wall-E, showing a desolate, trash-covered Earth.
Oh yeah, heartbreaking.
But Hoppers approaches the concept of the environment from a radically different philosophical angle.
Yeah, the source text points out something fascinating here. It notes that traditional eco-documentaries or eco-fables usually frame nature as something fragile that humans need to passively protect from a distance.
Right. We observe it, we clean it up, we leave it alone.
Exactly. But Hoppers argues that observation isn't enough. It frames nature as something we need to literally become part of in order to truly understand.
This is where the technology comes in.
Right. Mabel doesn't just watch the threatened ecosystem through a screen. She physically embodies it through the Hopper tech. She has to feel what the forest feels.
And that concept of embodiment, moving from a passive observer to an active participant within a different physical form, leads us directly into the film's exploration of identity.
Oh, this was my favorite part of the research.
It's without a doubt the film's most ambitious swing and where it does its most important cultural work.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Cinema Blend wrote a whole piece praising the film for how it handles embodiment and identity, specifically regarding the protagonist.
Yeah, they really highlighted Mabel's character arc.
Because in the animation industry, there is this frustratingly persistent, almost systemic trope where characters, and specifically protagonists of color, are transformed into non-human creatures for the vast majority of the runtime.
It's a very well-documented issue. You look at films like The Princess and the Frog, where Tiana spends most of the movie as an amphibian.
Right.
Or Spies in Disguise, where Will Smith's character is turned into a pigeon.
Yeah.
Even Pixar's own Soul placed its black lead into a blue, blob-like soul form for a massive chunk of the narrative.
Yeah, and while the studios often claim they do this to make the characters feel, universal, the actual mechanism of the trope ends up erasing the very human representation that the film initially promised.
You market a diverse human character, but you give the audience an animal.
Exactly. But Hoppers actively subverts that. The sources emphasize that Mabel doesn't just get trapped in this robotic beaver body while the plot happens to her.
No, she maintains control.
In the climax of the film, she is allowed to reclaim her human agency. It's like they took that classic Frog Prince body swap curse, but instead of forcing the character to wait around for a magical kiss or some external savior, they gave the protagonist the steering wheel.
I love that analogy.
She drives the technology, doesn't drive her.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see why this specific subtle narrative choice gives the film such deep cultural resonance.
It's huge.
This isn't just a clever plot point. It functions almost like a structural apology for decades of animation sidelining diverse characters. Yes, there are chaotic, insect-driven, apocalyptic subplots happening in the background.
Which again sounds totally unhinged and kind of terrifying.
It absolutely is terrifying. But amidst all that noise and slapstick comedy, the film is doing the quiet, vital work of giving a protagonist of color active agency over her own identity in her own physical form.
And that reclamation ties beautifully into the film's final major thematic pillar, which is coexistence.
Coexistence between humans, animals, and technology. The trifecta.
Precisely. The film fundamentally argues that promoting dialogue and attempting to truly understand the other side is the only way to solve complex problems.
And it takes the old idiom of walking a mile in someone else's shoes, incredibly literally.
Yeah. In this case, it's swimming a mile in their robotic beaver tail.
It posits that you cannot solve an ecological crisis or a human crisis through domination or observation alone. You have to integrate. It's a very optimistic view of conflict resolution that beautifully echoes Pixar's core belief system.
So let's step back and look at the whole board here. And we have this movie. It features towering, sophisticated thematic ambitions about identity, the historical erasure of POC characters, and ecological embodiment.
Yeah.
It has a premise so weird it practically defies logic. And it has an execution that is, according to the data, undeniably flawed, featuring juvenile humor and a weak villain that creates major tonal friction.
Right. It's a lot to weigh.
So synthesizing all of that, the comprehensive review we are pulling our final data from gives the film a final verdict of 8 out of 10.
An 8 out of 10 is an incredibly respectable score. But the reviewer does explicitly state that the film does not reach the emotional heights or the structural perfection of masterpieces like Up or Inside Out.
Right, but the review also says something that I think is the most important takeaway of this entire deep dive.
What's that?
It says that Hoppers is vital because it officially marks the beginning of Pixar's messy comeback era.
Ah, I love that phrase. Messy comeback.
Isn't it great? It implies a massive shift in corporate and creative philosophy. It means the studio is finally asking the question, what if we just made something weird, heartfelt, and completely different?
It actually resembles the early days of Pixar, not because the animation is flawless, but because the raw creative spirit is there.
Yes.
It's a jolt of energetic risk-taking that we just haven't seen from them in years. It really looks like a studio shedding the paralysis of perfectionism.
Which they desperately needed to do.
For a very long time, the expectation to create a flawless, culture-defining masterpiece every single time seemed to trap Pixar. When the bar is that high, you become terrified of failing, which traps you in a cycle of producing very safe, predictable sequels.
Right.
Hoppers is them kicking the walls of that box down.
So what does this all mean? I want to turn this over to you listening right now, because this brings up a fascinating dilemma for us as consumers of art.
It really does.
As a viewer, do you prefer a safe, perfectly polished sequel? You know, the kind that hits all the expected nostalgic notes, the villain is properly menacing, the pacing is flawless, but it doesn't really challenge you.
Or do you prefer a messy, experimental leap of faith?
Exactly. Something like Hoppers that might stumble over its own tone, but gives you an entirely new, bizarre experience.
It is the ultimate debate in modern pop culture, comfort versus novelty.
Yeah.
But if we analyze the broader landscape of animation right now, which is incredibly crowded and often highly sanitized by algorithms trying to predict what we want, daring to be strange is a tremendous asset.
It really is.
Knowledge, creativity, and evolution in any medium require stepping out of comfort zones. Hoppers might stumble in its second-act pacing, or its villain design might fall flat, but the value of a major legacy studio putting its massive financial weight behind an original, bizarre, and heartfelt concept is far more valuable to the industry than just playing it safe with another sequel.
I completely agree. It's that old adage, you can't discover new oceans unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore.
That's a great way to put it.
Pixar just took a giant robotic beaver-sized leap off the shore. And honestly, even if the landing was a little clumsy, the jump itself is incredibly exciting and worth celebrating.
It proves that the studio is still alive, still questioning the boundaries of the medium, and most importantly, still capable of genuine surprise.
Which brings us right back to that strange mystery box we opened at the start of our deep dive today. We went in looking for the old, perfectly calibrated Pixar that we grew up with, but instead we found a completely new, slightly chaotic, but deeply ambitious version of them.
A messy comeback.
A messy comeback. And frankly, I think a messy studio taking big swings is way more exciting than a perfect studio playing it safe. So, to wrap this up, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over, building on the wild premise of this movie. We talked a lot about the power of embodiment today. If you had access to that experimental Hopper technology right now, what animal's consciousness would you transfer into to gain a new perspective on a complex problem in your own life or community? What could you learn by seeing your world through completely different eyes? Got any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions or favorite moments in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more reviews and content on the latest news, movies, dramas, and books. And hit the bell icon so you won't miss any new updates.